Hi, good afternoon or good day to you. It's been quite a while since I've done one of these things and put out a little video. But I'd like to greet you today from Kingston, Ontario, Federation Square here in downtown Kingston. And we're actually at the very square public square where Canada was actually declared a nation. And this building here behind me is actually the building that was actually built for Canada's first parliament, which in fact was never used for parliament because they ended up moving it to Ottawa. But we're here in Kingston, and we've just actually finished a summit gathering of leaders from across Canada, right from Vancouver to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And we had Canadians come and gather with us from Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Quebec. Beautiful group from Quebec. We just fell in love with them. And also all over Ontario and Northern Ontario and Ottawa. And anyway, it was a great gathering of remnant people, Canadians, looking, basically in this hour to gather together and lay some tracks for the future and the destiny of our nation. And it was a beautiful event. And as most summits are, we had different sessions talking on kingdom governance and really the hour that we're in with really what I see coming as a rebirthing of Canada. And so we gathered and we, in between the sessions, we broke bread together and heard stories and those that have been affected over the last few years of everything that we've been through here in the nation. Men and women who laid down their lives even during, the convoy, and many marriages and businesses and all sorts of things that were really shook, but the surrender in the people to fight for what's right and to fight for truth and righteousness and justice within the nation. And anyway, I'm so honored to have Grant Abraham joining me today. And I just said, Grant, before we leave, and because we're going actually from Kingston, we're heading up to Ottawa, and there's a national gathering of Canadians coming into Ottawa for the National Prayer Breakfast there, where we'll be meeting on Parliament Hill and, doing some tours and connecting. And so, there'll be members of Parliament and different ones, in attendance. And again, Canadians from coast to coast, with interest in what lies ahead for our great nation. And so I told Grant, I said, Grant, we would be amiss after everything we've talked about over the last few days to leave Kingston with just a little bit of a briefing about some of the things we've talked about and just bring a wider awareness to Canadians as to, some of the things that we're seeing and understanding and what God is doing. And so I want to welcome you today.
Yep.
And thank you for taking the time to have a few words here.
Barry, thank you. It means such an important place in our nation's history, such an important time in our contribution to our nation's history, because we know when we look at our nation right now, we know there's so many broken things in it. And there's such a huge disconnect and frustration within the people of Canada with our government and the direction, the line of travel on so many fronts. It's not just the economy, it's things like the value changes that are being made in our nation. And so at this conference, we've been talking about really firing the forge to begin to look at the elements of what built our nation, where we're going off track, the discussion around the disconnection from what the supremacy of God and the rule of law actually means in terms of a working government, and how we've lost that connection between the foundational bedrock values that built this nation, our culture, our values, our traditions, and we are seeing this disconnection happening. People are asking, where has our country gone?
Yeah.
And so there are people of faith in Canada, many faiths, but Christian faith, and they're praying, they're talking, they're actually asking God about what to do about this. And this is part of the discussion because we made a mistake, I think, in this nation and in parsing out or separating this discussion about what happens in the public square and disconnecting it from the value framework that built the nation. I'm not convinced that it ever should have been disconnected in the way that we now have zero abortion law. We now have a Canada where the government has wedged itself in between the parents and children in terms of how a child should be raised. I'm thinking specifically of Bill C4 here, which was unanimously passed by the Conservative Party, which really is a betrayal of the parental trust to steward how a child should be brought up. It touches upon the primacy of parental authority. It touches upon freedom of religion. And I'm sure whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Sikh or Buddhist in this country, you don't want the government stopping you from intervening and engaging in how your child approaches medical decisions that are irreversible and removes their genitalia because they take a notion. In our day, we maybe made bad choices about alcohol or drugs or something, but now that's an irreversible decision. And so there are value conversations going on in this country. You know, you in your preamble, you talked about faith, you talked about doing communion, and in our history, we have had this synergy of these values that actually spawned what our laws are. Mm-hmm. And what's happened in our country there's this declaration of supremacy of God and the rule of law, and yet we don't have, it's almost like we've been afraid to talk about the values that flow from that truth.
That's right.
That actually built this nation and made it wealthy and prosperous and free. And free means that you're free not to have any faith. And so when I talk about this conversation, I'm talking about it in relation to the civic moral order that built this nation. It was a Christian and is a Christian nation. There's still over 50% of the country that aligns with these values. And there's many more that may not see it in relation to a religious discussion, but see the success of America and the UK and Australia and New Zealand in terms of those being the foundation stones that built the nation. And what's happening right now is there's a Marxist deconstruction that's being brought to our country. There's a globalist agenda that's seeking to strip away our nationhood, our identity as people.
That's right.
And it's actually what is taking away our rights. And so Canada needs to wake up and recognize that when Justin Trudeau says we're going to be a post-nation state, it means we're going to lose the connection between our responsibility to ensure that our governors are doing the things that they should in terms of building the nation that we want for our grandchildren. And so we're getting poorer, we're losing control, we're feeling less free, and this is what's going on because we're not having this conversation. The biggest frustration in Canada, and as I talk to Canadians now really from coast to coast, from BC to Nova Scotia now, is this sense of this losing of control, this sense that it's not just about money, it's about what are we? We do have an identity. People know we have an identity. They're talking about it. This sense of our culture, our values and traditions is there's an attempt on right now to revise it out, to airbrush it out of what we are and turn us into some collective amorphous nothing. But there is a value system here. It's what built the nation. There are foundation stones that built this nation. And so that's what we're actually talking about. If we want to talk about another metaphor of firing the forge, we need to get back to the sharpening those tools that actually built this nation. And this is the significance of this conversation. And for many people, I think for people of faith, there's a stretch coming where they have to look and say, what am I holding company with in relation to the political realm? Because we understand the parable of the talents and what stewardship means, but we're actually giving our yes to political parties that are stripping away the inalienable freedoms that have been given to us by God in this country.
Right.
Not just a government. And I think this is what we've got so screwed up in now, is that we think we're being led to believe that the government is giving us these rights. It's not. Government's there to ensure they're protected and ensure there's not people trying to violate them. And it's supposed to steward these rights for us. And now we've got things really mixed up. So this is the preeminent conversation in this country. And the bigger challenge is that people of faith are not necessarily engaging this and saying, well, when I give my vote, or I give my political contribution, or I give my political alignment to a party, the decisions that they're making are actually taking company with decisions about abortion,
yes,
about, well, let's call it murder.
Yeah.
They're taking decisions about breaking down the trust that parents and grandparents have with their children,
yes,
to realize that kids make silly mistakes in terms of understanding who or what they are, in terms of their identity. We don't want them being able to not have a fulfilled life because they've mutilated their genitalia. And these are things that we're calling free that aren't. They're actually bondage and destruction. And we need to have these value conversations. And we can't just do it saying, you know what, you get a bit more money in your pocket, you're going to be more free. That's not what freedom means. It's such a superficial tinsel.
Yeah.
So this is the conversation, and it's a huge one. And it does transcend government, politics, an understanding of the Christian faith, our history, and what our culture and traditions, the value of our culture and traditions, and where we should be going as a nation. It's about vision and destiny. That's the conversation that we need to be having.
I completely agree, Grant. And when you hear the evidence about some of these groups that are actually, supported by federal parties in back rooms, planning the deconstruction of our nation, intentionally, working, methodically into taking our rights and our freedoms away. I don't think most Canadians are really aware of the seriousness of the hour. And, from what we're seeing and what we're aware of, we're in a moment, literally in global history where, you look at escalations in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, where we're on a brink of a financial, collapse, as a lot of these systems, are just, the Federal Reserves, unsustainable. We're in for some serious days ahead. And I don't know that most Canadians even have an awareness of how serious the hour really is. And so, I think it's so important to get to the bedrock of some of these things, to engage Canadians in a way that, we've just kind of been on autopilot. We've been doing things for, almost like you say, out of muscle memory.
Yeah.
And we're not in the same Canada that we once were. And it doesn't matter the color of the party anymore. Those that we thought represented us and who we trusted with our Judeo, Christian roots and values are no longer standing in those places, with those same roots and values, and deeply concerning. So, I just think that, with what you're doing, I honor you for laying down your life, and the great personal sacrifice that it has been for you to step up into this space, because I know, this isn't, this is a call for you. This isn't something that you've done just because you thought it was a good idea, that you've been actually called to this. And so I honor you for laying down your life and doing what you are for serving the nation.
Well, I think Canada has a destiny. I learned a lot in my time within the Conservative Party and what I saw within the party. I'm not here today to talk about that, but I am, in the sense that I'm seeing issues not being engaged. We tend to think, Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party is wrecking this country and kind of creating this havoc. And yet, Justin Trudeau said in 2018, Canada is going to be the first post-nation state. He said in 2020 and 2021 that COVID's provided us with an opportunity for a reset. And yet the loyal opposition, which has been the Conservative Party of Canada, has never, ever stopped to ask those questions. What does a post-nation state mean? And what are you talking about? We are a nation state. We have a constitution.
That's
we
right.
have a people that understand it. But no one's ever stopped to ask that question. And, I always say that's exactly why the United Kingdom left the EU and Brexit. There's a deep understanding of the loss of control of culture and the values of the culture and the borders and laws. Mm-hmm. And that's what post-nationalism means. That's what the EU meant for the UK. We're not having those conversations. COVID has provided us with an opportunity for a reset. When did we ever talk about what a reset meant? You would have thought that would have been the easiest thing in the world to ask in the election in 2019 or the election in 21 or in 3 leadership races. Yeah. But nada, ever.
Yeah.
And what does that say? And at some point it goes beyond just saying that it's ineptness to complicitness.
Yeah.
And we are being led over a cliff by the conversations we aren't having. And my impression of the Conservative Party is that they're quite happy to not have those conversations because it's just a calculus of power. And they think that the Conservative Party, they think that Canadians just want to have some kind of economic freedom. Yeah, we do. We should be a super wealthy nation in this world and actually being a force for good, but we're not. We're getting poorer, and we're not making the economic decisions that we need to make. It's not about axe attacks. It's about a whole series of economic strategy that's rooted in a value system that's actually going to bring us forward in blessing as a righteous nation because we actually are doing the right things.
That's right.
And this is the conversation. Why? And I mean, another piece to this. Why aren't we talking about foreign interference? I mean, that was a report that came out in 2019.
Right.
And what did David McGinty say on YouTube? He said there's ample evidence of severe compromises to our democratic process. Where are the Conservative Party talking about that? They had MPs on the committee that produced the report.
I know.
And they offered publicly to do briefings for any MPs that weren't on the committee so they could bring it up in Parliament.
Yes.
Where were they?
Yeah.
Deeper question. Where's the media now in confronting the Conservative Party with why they weren't talking about those questions in the last 5 years?
Exactly.
Everyone says, the media's bought and paid for, and they're in support of the Liberal Party. But they're sure not pointing out, if they are such a hateful enemy to the Conservatives, they're sure giving them a softball pass on why it is that they didn't say anything for 5 years about it. And I know that they knew because I talked to MPs that were on that committee.
Yeah. I from those that I've been in touch with and talked to and whistleblowers and different ones, the awareness is there, but they are not given the freedom to really express and bring these things to the light. And so I look at it as the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP. Well, the Liberals and Conservatives, they're two wings on the same bird. That they're not standing in our best interests. Why these obvious silence, in these issues, and a standing ovation to a Nazi war criminal within our Parliament. I mean, absolutely ludicrous.
Right.
Right. So my opinion.
Yeah. So we have either we're really bad historians or there's a sense of loss of moral compass in terms of what's going on in the country. So, I mean, these are the things that Canadians need to think about and I just feel like we shouldn't be getting suckered into the bigger conversation about let's just get rid of Justin Trudeau. It's so much deeper and the stakes are so much higher. Yeah. And in a sense, if we're going to be so shallow, I don't want us to get what we deserve if we're so shallow. But people have to wake up and look deeper into this conversation. I think a lot of Canadians are waking up. In fact, as I've traveled across the country having this conversation, I'm shocked at in pockets at the level of awareness. It makes me question how valid this 20-point lead is that they say the Conservatives have over the Liberals. Right. Especially when you see the fact that the media is not asking the questions you think they would if they wanted to crucify Poilievre. So, I mean, we need to be thinking, we need to be discerning, we need to open up our eyes and look at what's going on in this nation and have these conversations, So The reality is we have an activist Supreme Court that's undermining our understanding of our laws.
That's right.
There's a very clear understanding of the politicization of our police forces and being used against Canadians. When you start to consider the fact that our government is creating what's called a fast pass, so non-Canadians can join the military. Yeah. And they're lowering the standards for speaking either English or French, so they can allow fresh immigrants to join our military who aren't Canadians. And at the same time, they're passing legislation so that the military can be drawn upon by the defense minister or the attorney general or whatever to support police enforcement against Canadians. Yeah. You just kind of have to go, well, why do we need that? Yeah. And how do you reconcile these discussions about the squashing and the release of militarized horses and body armor against Canadians in Ottawa, and we have Palestinians marching around the country calling for the destruction of a Canadian ally, and clearly being anti-Semitic in terms of the Jewish communities within this country. Yes. But we can't call it out. We can't say, the best you hear is, well, we don't support anti-Semitism. Right. But it's time that we have a conversation. There's lots of great, in Calgary, there's a strong Muslim community. They've been neighbors in the area that I live in. It's not about Muslims. It's about militant Islam. That's right. We need to be having a conversation about militant Islam the compatibility of militant Islam with our culture, traditions, and values. Why aren't we having that conversation? Because everyone's scared to. But we're going to lose this country unless we actually start having these strong conversations. And there's a lot of people that are waking up to them, because we need to forge what we're going to be for the next 150 years. And if we wuss out by compromising into a flimsy decision just to get rid of Justin Trudeau, we're going to be in exactly the same position, because the Conservative Party hasn't spoken about any of this stuff for 10 years. Yeah. And if you think apples are enough, then you're going to get what you deserve unless we fix this now. That's why we started the United Party of Canada. It's actually not really about politics. It's about patriotism and bringing this country back to a place of strength. We need to reconnect the values back into our understanding of the Constitution, the supremacy of God, and the rule of law. We need to dismantle the threats to our country, and that means this Marxist ideology that's embedded in itself across our federal statutes, provincial statutes, municipal statutes. And we need to return this country to strength and secure the strength that this nation is and should be. And we need to ensure that, we're free, our children are free, and we set this country up for a robust future for our grandchildren. That's what I'm doing. We can talk about anything else. When we talk about values in this country, we talk about taking care of our veterans. We talk about taking care of our nation. That's actually what conservative values are, is finding that matrix, that connection between fiscal responsibility and social dignity. That's right. And that's how we're going to be measured as a nation. And I'm not hearing those conversations in this country. And we need to, because that's our future. That's part of what our value is. And it's not about God or faith. It's about a nation that recognizes that God's given us those rights, and he gives us the freedom not to choose him. Not that that's his wish, but that's the bedrock value of our nation in this conversation. But it's what allows us to say yes to some things and no to others. And we've allowed our walls and gates to be broken in this country. We don't control the gates anymore in terms of understanding what we're saying yes or no to. It's just whatever. Yeah. No one's happy.
Yeah. And I had something across my mind, as I've traveled around. I think as we've traveled around, we've had, I often get people and they ask, why another party? You're vote splitting. Why another party? We've got, there's, the PPC, there's, the Christian Heritage Party, there's these other parties, and so, I know the answer, but, I think for a lot of Canadians, they're maybe unaware of, and so I guess maybe just, if you could maybe speak into that a little bit as to, your perspective on this.
Well, I mean, all those parties have good people in them, right? I think I've talked a lot about the Conservative Party and what they're not saying, which is one of the biggest deceptions in the country. When I consider this discussion about splitting the vote, I'm like, yeah, I am. I guess I am splitting the vote, but I'm creating conversations that will split the vote because the Conservative Party was formed out of the Reform and the former Progressive Conservatives.
Correct. Yeah.
And they were brought together to fuse together fiscal responsibility and the social dignity that comes with social conservatism. The Conservative Party has consistently ignored those values now for 20 years. In fact, I think there was a young MP in 2006 that recognized what Stephen Harper had done in terms of changing the definition of marriage and allowing abortion to totally stop, the abortion laws to stop in this country. And he referred to the social conservatives, which are a lot of the people that are now looking even as a majority in this country, and saying those were embarrassing and bombastic values that typified the Reform era. And basically, thank God we're past those. And yet, it's the ignoring of those values that are actually creating the deeper problem. So my answer to the splitting the vote is that I'm not actually splitting the vote. The party is splitting the vote, and that there's people coming to the realization that their value system is being ignored, and they're kind of they're almost like abuse victims in a dysfunctional relationship, because every time there's an election, they get a little cuddle and kiss and get induced back in or gaslit back into voting, and then the party never does anything. It's just like the policy convention that happened in the Conservative Party there in Quebec at the end of the year of 2023. They did all these policies, put them all in place, designed some good policies, and Pierre Poilievre comes and says there's no guarantee that any of these policies will make it into an election platform. So if that's the case, what's the point?
Wow.
Right? So, what other way is there to see that, right? So I look and I say, I'm not splitting the vote. What I'm trying to do is wake up the people within the Conservative Party that have Stockholm Syndrome to see that they're actually being used and abused and used and abused in a dysfunctional, destructive cycle. And it's actually undermining the nation when you connect it up into the bigger conversation. And so I think we're in a spiritual war in this country. There's actually a darkness. Stephen Harper in 2003 called it dark moral nihilism. And that's what we've got. We've got a moral vacuum that's actually evil. And, secularism is not just neutral. It's an agenda that's deconstructing our value framework. And these are the kinds of conversations that we kind of have. And that takes me to a discussion about the PPC. The PPC cries freedom. And when I saw what Maxime Bernier was doing in 2018, I thought, we probably do need a new expression of political expression in the country. Yeah. But again, if we're in an understanding of light and darkness, good and evil, or this concept of a spiritual war that is a tension that within the matrix of our nation, how do you fight against darkness inside a political party that denies the existence of light?
Correct.
And that's why I couldn't just align myself with the PPC, because I cannot allow that message of what our actual source of our freedom is to be denied.
Yes.
And a lot of people need to look at that, and it's more than that. It's freedom plus responsibility. It's freedom plus duty. It's freedom plus a sense of an understanding of posterity and the future of our nation. So we're thinking about others that are coming. And this is the stewardship that I think that our nation needs. And I'm sure that the PPC, people that are in the PPC don't like looking at this, but this is the perfect example of the PPC candidate in Ottawa that ran in 2021. A gentleman called David Yeo, who stood on a platform of freedom, but at the same time as he was doing that, he was developing the ArriveCan app that was setting any unvaccinated Canadian into bondage traveling in and out of our country, and made $7 million or 6.1 or whatever the actual number was. Yeah. But that's freedom, but with no responsibility or no concern for your fellow citizen.
Right.
And so these are the kinds of challenges. So these conversations aren't happening. We need to be having them in the country, and we do. So this is a bigger agenda than just politics. It's what is the purpose of Canada as a force for good in this nation? What is its destiny? and how do we establish a vision that actually deals with the issues that takes us to the destiny that we all know that we want for this nation. And this is the conversation we're having under the term Firing the Forge, which is part of the name of the book that I've written, in terms of how do we get to where we need to go to fix this mess and find an off-ramp from the chaos that we're seeing right now in the country. And these things are all converging together into a discussion. In this particular case, it happened to be with a group of Christian people who are praying about how to fix their country.
Yeah. I know, when we came in to speak today, there's a lamp stand right here in the public square.
Yeah.
And I noticed that right away. When you talk about having those gather around, lampstands and creating environments and communities to have these discussions and to actually, consider getting their boots on the ground, to actually not just, because we can talk and we can mull about all of this, but there comes a point where we actually have to, put on our boots and tie them up and actually do something.
Right.
And, I think we all have got, we talk about it, but what would you say to Canadians that this resonates with in actually, getting them engaged and getting them motivated to actually get boots on the ground in the nation?
Well, I think for a long time, Canadians, we were able to have our values and be in our political party, and we grew up in Canada where the government was essentially good, and it really didn't matter that much whether it was a Liberal government or conservative government. And so we have this scenario where we've had this muscle memory of not having to really engage in these discussions. Now we're seeing a counterproductive governmental agenda. And then we have to recognize that we've actually been groomed or enculturated into separating the discussions between our values and what we are allowed to say in terms of what's right and wrong in the public square. Right. So there's this kind of muting and silencing of these value issues because progressive secularism doesn't want to talk about the other people in the country, the small fringe minority that actually holds the values that built the nation. Right. So we have allowed this wall to be built in our enculturization, I guess, in the country. We need to take that wall again down now and begin to show up and have these conversations. And it's not just in the political realm. It's the one of the things that I've seen across the country is one of the biggest betrayals of trust. And this applies to every single family in this country, whatever color or religion you are, is we don't want a division or a wall being built that breaks down the trust between the parent and the child when the child goes to school. Mm-hmm. You want to wind people up really quickly. You start having the schools start keeping secrets about the child transitioning at school. And we've actually got legislation now, federally and provincially, that's empowering school boards or provinces to keep that from children. Mm-hmm. We don't want to go there as a nation where we lose this understanding of the real engines in our society and what builds our society, which is our understanding of family. Mm-hmm. Families build communities, communities build strong nations. And if you start destroying that actual family unit, you destroy the community and we become a weak nation. And then do we want chaos? And that's why we're looking at discussions about borders. Why aren't we talking about the real issues in our country about immigration? Yeah. We won't talk about immigration. We just talk about it in terms of housing. But it's a time now in our nation. We have to have this culture, value, traditions conversation about what are we going to be, and then begin to define that for all the new Canadians that come in. And we're all immigrants to this country. That's right. But in the first 150 years, one thing we did get right is to define basically that there was an ethos and a value system to our country in terms of respecting our fellow man and doing unto others as we have them do unto us. And there's been a compatibility that has been built around hard work and family and building businesses and passing wealth to our kids. Agenda 2030 wants to take away that, wants to redefine what prosperity is, it wants to make it a collective value, and it wants to neutralize the core nuclear family. Yeah. You've got to stop that. Yeah. Couple more things. I'd like you, if you could share that story about that
there was a fellow you ran into, I believe, in the Lower Mainland, and he'd immigrated into Canada, and he was, elderly and a security guy. I'd like you to share a bit of his story, and then also, what God is doing, bringing unity with the East, the West, and the First Nations by some of the things that we're talking about.
Right.
And we can maybe touch on, because these are unifying things that actually I think are important to.
Yeah, they are. Well, in the Conservative leadership race of 2022, I went to speak at a building in Abbotsford on Clearbrook Road. It was the Mennonite Community Center, where a lot of the older folks in Mennonite live, but in Abbotsford live that are Mennonite background. And I was there in the building early than I should have maybe been. The room wasn't unlocked, so I was waiting around for the room to get unlocked. And there was a man there who was kind of like the warden security guy, and he was an older man. He was kind of a key holder. And he said to me, so what are you doing here? What are you doing in this room? And I said, well, we're here to talk about the values in our country. We're here to talk about the leadership of the Conservative race. And I said, I'm doing this because I'm desperately concerned that we're not having the right conversations and that our country's actually being sold out. And I'm really seeing the advance of a Marxist ideology that is communism.
Yeah.
At its very root, if you want to call it globalism or whatever, but it's a stripping away of what we are as a people. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And he says, that's real. He goes, I'm so glad to hear that there's a young guy talking about this. Okay. He's like 85, right? So we'll roll with the young guy statement. But anyway, so that's what he said. And I said, well, that's what we got to do. We need to have that conversation. He says, well, I hope you do have that conversation, because I'm a Mennonite that came out of Russia. What he really meant was out of the Ukraine. And he said, this country's been great to us in terms of being able to walk in the faith that we've had and to build our family and to build wealth and pass it to our grandchildren. But we have nowhere to go now. We have to have this conversation. And that really was such a significant epiphany from an old man who was an immigrant to this nation, who was actually realizing that in the last, few years of his life, that we have a really significant value discussion that we need to have to get our nation back on track.
That's right.
And so it is. That story haunts me in some ways, and it'll often pop up when I get into where are we really at and who's recognizing what the problems are.
Yeah.
People are out there, and when you actually talk about them, it actually brings an awareness to the deeper truth, but you have to have the courage to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And so when I even talk about lampstands, I use that metaphor in my book about people starting to understand these issues, finding the other people that do, meeting around lampstands, because that is where we can actually project a voice. It's light and darkness, and lampstands then coming together to create a movement to take the country back.
That's right.
And that's what this is. I forgot the other question, actually.
I was just, the unification of the West and the East and the First Nations.
Yeah.
And what these discussions are stirring up, and that unity and that bond, commonality that really is starting to surface.
Well, that's a really interesting conversation too, because being from Western Canada, there's kind of a perception that Western Canada has this perception that it's a colony of the colony and it's paying for Ontario and Quebec, and indeed there is an awful lot of money that's gone from the West to Central Canada. But we also have this bolt-on that Quebec doesn't care, and it's kind of at the trough, just, sucking up our wealth, and they don't really care about Canada, and they separate in an instant and all that. And actually, from the convoy forward, meeting Quebecers that came back to Alberta that would have made comments like, this is the first time in my life that I feel like I'm a Canadian from Quebec rather than a Quebecer in Canada.
Beautiful.
And that really started to open my eyes to the narratives that we allow to be spoken to the unity, the federal unity of our country.
Yes.
And, I guess traveling in Ontario, being at this conference, being in Nova Scotia, and coming across Quebecers, I don't think that that's their heart at all. They're actually talking about the value of our nation together. And in many ways, they're ahead in their contending for wanting to keep the country together and talk about these values. And this value conversation is such a significant thing that they're actually asking for, and I've been contacted from Quebec because from different groups in Quebec that have said, you know what, we really like the return to the value discussion.
Yes.
Because we're longing for that to be returned in Quebec. We don't like the kind of this amorphous nothingness that is becoming the value framework for our government, where everything is said no to, and you're stripped of all your kind of cultural religious identity. And so I find that that's a very interesting thing. It's kind of a tune that's being played across the country, and we need to have the courage to sing, right? We need to have that courage to sing it. Yeah. And so there were some Quebecers even at this summit that we were at here in Kingston, and that was exactly the message. And they're very interested in a new conversation. And being an Anglo with poor French, I wasn't necessarily thinking about Quebec, but they're saying, you know what, we have the messaging for Quebec. We just want the platform to be able to articulate it to the Quebecers in the country.
Beautiful.
That's the, in the sense that if you want to put it into Christian terms, that's that federal unity that we have in terms of what our country's about, he shall have dominion from sea to sea, which is our national motto.
Yes.
It's on our coat of arms. That's the Quebecers talking about that and catalyzing a response for that. And saying, like, basically one of them said to me, you know what, you're giving us kind of a paint by number picture, and you're allowing us to color in what the colors are in this, because this framework of discussion is actually what Quebecers are yearning for at a deeper level. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And so how does that work, right?
They're very significant.
Yeah,
very significant. Grant,
and also on the Indigenous level too, right?
We have hereditary chiefs.
That's the other piece.
We have hereditary
chiefs. We have Indigenous people that are coming saying, I love the way that they talk about it. They don't talk about themselves as Indians or as Indigenous people. They talk about themselves as the host nation that welcomed us to this country, and how we need to build reconciliation together. And this is true reconciliation, not reconciliation that is just paid for by a liberal government to establish elected chiefs that just create a money churn that's a transactional relationship. We want to see a nation now built where we can be one people, one blood, one nation.
Yes.
And that's part of the forging of the new nation. Yeah. And that is reverberating within the Indigenous community as well.
It's remarkable to see that piece, because a lot of Canadians look and they see that. That's almost, like an insurmountable, issue and how this is going to happen. But we're actually literally seeing a resonance within, our First Peoples and what they're walking and seeing. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
And that just to jump back on that, it's about dignity and honor in that understanding of welcoming us to a host nation. I don't think every conversation I have, I get the real truth is that there was an impression that the people that came to this nation, the French and the English, were welcome. But there was a dishonoring and a loss of dignity, which created a broken relationship.
That's right.
Something in the midst of this is repairing. We're seeing a true reconciliation.
It is.
And that's a powerful thing.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Maybe just share for those that, maybe want to contact you or reach out and connect and, maybe, get to know you a little better and perhaps wherever they are from coast to coast, how, we can build some bridges.
Sure. Well, we're traveling across the country right now, communicating a lot to people that are engaging us in this conversation across the country. You can find information about us on unitedpartyofcanada.ca. You can hear a lot of my thoughts on Twitter or X. It's under at Grant Abraham. There's a Facebook page and a Telegram page too. It's more information, or it's a repetition of other posts that I make. So I do a lot of my own Twitter stuff, but not Facebook and Instagram. And then I think it's just a case of writing in and contacting, and I do my very best to answer the questions that people ask as they send emails in. And sometimes I'll just send a note and say, hey, can we have a chat about this and have a conversation? And out of that, there's new beachheads forming in terms of communities that are actually having this conversation and seeing we've got to have a deeper conversation, and we got to connect the values back up into our superstructure of what our Constitution's been about. I mean, we've had a failed system, but there's still this connectivity of our history and the supremacy of God and the rule of law and the value system that built the country. We've got to keep having those conversations, and whatever pathway you choose, find out where we're meeting. We're doing meetings across the country all year. We're waiting to see if there's a new if there's an election coming or what that's going to look like. And come join the light, come join the conversation, and let's take our country back.
Yeah, amen. Grant, as always, it's such a pleasure.
Yeah, good to chat, Barry.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And so thank you. I hope you made it through this. Share it, look it over, chew on it, and we hope to continue the conversations.
Yeah.
God bless you all, and may He bless you and protect you and overshadow you all and your families in all your ways. In Jesus' name. Bless you. Bye-bye.